They're a fantastic organization. We are happy to be partnering with them. Of course, Premier is a premier, pardon the pun, provider of Acumatica and Microsoft ERP solutions and other IT solutions. They demonstrate a real thoughtfulness and maturity as an organization, and we're very grateful to be partnered with them. So again, Ryan, thank you for collaborating with us on this, and let's do more in the future. All right, what I'd like to do, folks, before we launch into the meat of today's topic is just to provide some context here. Who is Secuvant and who am I? What we do at Secuvant is we provide our clients with a pathway forward, regardless of their cyber maturity. And this mantra kind of, or messaging came from a meeting we had with an unnamed client who had just been breached. And it was a client that we just started working with, or were engaging with rather at the time. And the CEO leaned over, grabbed a wastebasket and said, "I feel like I need to throw up. And I've been breached, and this means," and it had a significant impact on his organization. And it was at that moment we realized that the services that we provide help to relieve some of that nausea and pain by providing a better pathway forward and better and stronger security posture for our clients. We do that through expert assessment, risk program management, vCISO services, or in other words, virtual chief information security officer. We have a gentleman here at Secuvant who not only worked for several large organizations in IT and security administration, but was also an expert cyber security and attorney with Holland and Hart, a renowned law firm. And so he and his team provide what we call risk program management services for organizations that don't have a CISO, or maybe they have a CISO, but they'd like a sounding board for a few hours a month. They'd like a team to help write info security policies and help them in that regard. We also provide a service called Managed Detection and Response, otherwise known as SOC as a service. We have a fully operational security operations center, and we become the co-managed or co-partnered outsourced security team for many of our clients. We're happy to talk to you about any of these, and at the end of the presentation we'll give you some ways that you can contact us, but primarily you can reach out to Premier to set up any post-webinar meetings. Well, a little bit about myself. I started my technology career in the mid-'80s. I'm dating myself here a little bit, but managing a facility at Brigham Young University when the good old Mac 128K and the 64K IBM PC 5150 came out with a 360K floppy drive. Those were the days. Technology was wonderful. And then we got the 5 megabyte hard drive, and we thought we'd never fill that up until the 10 megabyte hard drive came out, and then the 20 megabyte and the 40 megabyte and the iOmega Bernoulli drives. And it was interesting to see technology literally double every 18 months, and it's for the most part done that ever since. I went to work later on for the WordPerfect Novell group, and later on, through an acquaintance I'd met there, got into the cyber realm with a local company here to Utah called Security Metrics, providing digital forensics and security services to the industry. To make a long story short, my cybersecurity journey eventually brought me to partner with some really upstanding folks called Secuvant, and those folks were helping their clients improve their cyber posture with policies and security controls and monitoring and managing their threats in the network environment. And I realized that was an organization that I really wanted to be with, and so hence I came to work for Ryan Layton, and who is the CEO of Secuvant. And it's been a great journey since February of 2018 when I joined these folks. When I'm not doing these webinars, I enjoy spending time with my 3 children and one on the way, and spending time singing in this little choir that some of you may have heard of before called the Tabernacle Choir on Temple Square. So that's a little bit about me and about the Secuvant organization. Today's presentation is going to focus on several things. First of all, the title, the 3.8 million cyber loss. I'm going to explain what that means and where that comes from. Then I'd like to share some principles with regards to cybersecurity, and we're going to delve into a cybersecurity maturity score for each one of you on the presentation today. So what I would suggest you do right now is look for a pen and a piece of paper or a notebook. I'm going to be asking you 10 questions, and what I'd like you to do is to write your answers down. It's going to be a score from 0 to 5, and we'll explain this again in a minute. But that will be the deliverable today from this presentation, is how cyber mature are you? And this content will help you with that. Then we'd like to have a few minutes for Q&A. We would encourage you throughout the presentation. You'll notice there is a chat functionality in your GoToMeeting screen. You may click on the little chat bubble in the upper right-hand corner, and when the chat window opens, you can send a message to organizers only. So Ryan will get those. Please, I would encourage you to, any question that might come up in your mind during the presentation, please put that question into the chat window, and then at the end of the presentation, Ryan will read those, and we'll have 5 or 10 minutes to answer your questions. Fair enough? Okay, and then finally we'll suggest some pathways forward where we can take you from where you are today to where you'd like to go in the cyber realm. With that, let's go ahead and we will jump into today's presentation. Now, one of my favorite sites, and I believe Ryan is going to give you all access to this presentation, and there are several URLs included here that are cyber breach calculators. This one in particular, I recommend that you go out and run through this exercise in your organization. It's free. It's provided by IBM with backup data from the Ponemon Institute, Gartner, Forrester, and other organizations. IBM's done a great job with this site. Here's the bottom line, folks. The average cost of a small medium enterprise in the US of A is $3.86 million. And that data comes from a number of sources. You might be wondering, well, I'm a small business. How could I possibly have that kind of a liability? Well, it scales according to the size of the organization, but it can be a significant percentage or chunk of your revenue. And let me just share with you some of the factors behind that. Often when an organization is breached, in order to protect themselves, they will have to hire a digital forensic organization. That's an organization that can come in, image the drives, preserve the logs, and find out what the heck happened as they go through each vector of each hard drive that's in scope, whether servers or workstations, and try to find out how the hacker got in, what they did, where they went, etc., and if there's malware in the systems. That kind of an engagement can cost an average of $15,000 to $20,000. For larger organizations, it might be a $100,000 type of a cost. Then you have the communication to your clients. If you're B2B, well, you have business-to-business clients. They need to be notified that you were breached and there's a possibility that their data was affected. Now, on that note, you can see that it's important to have an attorney that you can rely on to help you with these things, and we'll address that concept a little later. But can you see how the costs begin to mount? If consumers are involved, and you have many consumers, you may need to provide monitoring services. You'll need to notify them that there was a breach and potentially their data may have been affected. So you may have to go to a communications or PR firm to not only manage but to help you craft the message that you're sending out. Um, and that's to say nothing of the costs of remediating a breach in your organization. If you have servers that need to be reimaged, if you have databases that need to be rebuilt, if you need to buy new firewall equipment and set up VLANs and provide better segmentation and maybe encryption. As you can see, these things all cost some resources and some money, and now they need to be done. So you can see that the costs start to mount in an organization, and that's where those factors come from. Now, if you're in healthcare, for example, and let's say even in the healthcare organization you have a CISO and you have a cyber insurer, and you have an attorney, and you have an incident response team, your breach cost could be $11 million on the average with healthcare breaches. If you don't have any of those things, it can mount to $14 million. And so whether you're a small business or a very large business, regardless, these costs can have a tremendous impact on your business. Before I leave this concept, let me just share one story with you of a small Mexican restaurant down in the Southwest. Very popular restaurant. I was personally involved in helping them through a digital forensic process. This restaurant probably was in the couple $100,000 in revenue. Not huge, but a popular, a local establishment. A bad actor got into their system. And incidentally, when hackers get into a system, do you know, folks, what the average time in the system is before they're discovered? And if your answer was 180 to 200 days, you would be correct. According to the Ponemon Institute and others, a hacker will be in a system for approximately 200 days. And surely in this little restaurant, they were there for at least that amount of time because several hundred credit cards were siphoned off. Well, in this case, the processors or acquiring banks got a hold of the restaurant, notified them that they had been breached, that their fraud department had noticed that multiple customers were complaining of fraud after having eaten at their restaurant, and a forensic was ordered. That little restaurant had to pay, and for a small establishment, this was only about a $12,000 or $15,000 forensic, but that's a huge chunk of cash to outlay. And it was determined that there was malware and that the bad actors had probably been in for several months. That restaurant was then fined by the acquiring bank, who was fined by Visa, $80,000. And essentially what happened was they went out of business. And so you don't want that to be you, and you don't want that to, and that's kind of an extreme example, but I guess the point in saying that is that often smaller businesses say, well, if it happens, then we'll take measures, or what could we possibly have that would that anybody would want to hack? You would be surprised. We had a truck manufacturer recently get breached, and then they came to us for services, not, finally realizing that, wow, we never thought that we would be a target, but here is the impact it had on our business. If you do business, there is impact. And so we want to drill that point in today. On the call with me today is one of my good friends and associates here at Secuvant, Jeff Smith. He's our Executive Vice President. And as he meets with clients, he will often say, hey, have you considered the impact of a cyber breach to your business? And then have you quantified that? And so that is an overriding question today, folks, is what is the impact of a cyber incident to your business? And what could that possibly do to you? So be thinking about that as we go through today's presentation. Now, we are going to do a bit of a quiz or a cybersecurity litmus score for you today, but we do want to put in a caveat, and that is note that an organization's cybersecurity maturity is a very complex matter, and it's based on many factors. This exercise is intended to educate participants in the fundamental elements that make up cybersecurity maturity. To fully understand your organization's cybersecurity risk and maturity, please do consult a qualified cybersecurity professional like our virtual CISO, Matt Sorensen, whom I mentioned earlier in the organization, who can really dig into some of the cyber facts and the data points in your organization. We also know that cybersecurity is multifaceted. There is no silver bullet, and that's another important thing to note on this presentation today. Today we're going to talk about 10 specific things that you can do, and you're going to score yourselves in those things as it relates to your cyber maturity. But note that everything from firewalls to policy to encryption to endpoint, and depending on the organization, there are many things that are needful and important in a layered cybersecurity approach. An organization may think that they're secure if they have endpoint protection. Well, that is a good start. And that leads to the next point, is as you begin to spend money, this is what we call the cyber cost risk curve, risk will be reduced. But it isn't one particular thing that will help you to reduce the risk. It's multifaceted. Back in 2006, when I started with a company called Security Metrics, who was providing PCI advice to merchants, we would often talk to IT folks that would say, hey, we have a firewall, we're secure. And that was back in what I would call the naive Wild West of security. And everybody felt like a firewall was that six-shooter that they slung from the hip, and if the bad guys came in, they'd just pull out that six-shooter and blast away. Well, they soon realized that firewalls have open ports. Open ports broadcast services, and those services are coming from servers. And guess what? Servers and software have vulnerabilities, and eventually it all gets exploited. Also, as my friend Jeff likes to say, we put up a security ladder, and the hackers just build a bigger ladder to climb over the wall. So we have to put up a longer ladder, and they'll put up a longer ladder. And so it's never ending. The cyber vigilance has to be a constant thing. Well, here's the point of this graph. So as you begin to spend, the risk gets reduced. But the question is, how much money should I really spend in order to reduce the risk? Now, I can give you some industry figures here, and you may want to write these down. But in order to really find that optimization point in your organization, it needs to be done through analysis and facts. And here is a statistic. So according to Gartner, if you take what you're spending on your IT budget, 6% of that should be spent on cybersecurity. Now that's for organizations that are nominally successful in their cybersecurity endeavors. So again, I'll say that 6% of the total IT spend should be on cybersecurity. And then Gartner notes that for immature organizations, they may need to spend 15 to 20% to catch up to a reasonable state. And then again, a lot more if, perhaps if you're in the healthcare or other regulated industries. So the question is, how can you find that optimal nexus where risk and the investment make sense in terms of an algorithm we use, which takes the juncture of impact, effort, probability, and investment, and then the rest of the risk we can assign to a cyber insurer. So one outcome from this webinar may be that you'd like to engage for a cybersecurity assessment. We do provide them for both small and large organizations, but where are you in terms of that cost risk curve? Well, hopefully we'll provide some data points today that will help you to answer that question. Now, this next component has to do with a couple of things. One is executive buy-in. If you're an IT professional and you think about how you go about adding new controls into the environment or new technology or upgrading old technology, it's usually a factor of going to the economic authority, whether that's the CEO or the CFO or some other director or VP in an organization or business owner, to say, hey, I need X amount of dollars for this. And of course, you're asked to justify it. One of the obvious things is that it's critical to get executive buy-in to the cybersecurity landscape. They have to understand it. You have to understand, as an IT professional, their priorities, and it often those two don't come together. We find often in many organizations that they're very vendor driven. In other words, hey, this new tool or this next technology is going to help solve our problems, and so an organization will just jump right into the tool, as opposed to what is the executive priority in the organization, and how do we align the controls that we're implementing to that executive priority. Well, so we like to say that cyber risk is business risk at Secuvant, and it's not enough just to come in and do a cybersecurity assessment, but to understand the executive priority can be an important part of a complete cybersecurity assessment. So we've developed and trademarked a discussion and a workshop that we call the Secuvant Cyber 7. And these are not what I would call revolutionary. And the concept here is, have you had this conversation with your executives? And let me go through some of these, because we feel like they're an important part of understanding the business priorities and objectives, so that other controls can be properly prioritized. So in an organization, it's interesting to sit down with executives and find out whether their brand and reputation is more important than, say, the cost of remediation or perhaps business disruption. A couple of different contrasting environments. So if you are if you're Intermountain Healthcare, for example, HIPAA regulatory compliance is going to be a very important, so that number 4 may be number 1 or number 2 if you're Intermountain Healthcare. If you are, for example, Amazon, uptime is absolutely critical. So being able to be secure enough that you can't be taken down by hackers or DDoSed. Business disruption may be the most important thing if you're Amazon. Other organizations may say that their legal liability is of premier importance, or yet still, a number 6, data and intellectual property protection. That may be important to an engineering firm who has hundreds or even thousands of patents. And where are those patents located? What servers are they on? And do they want the Chinese stealing those patents? Certainly not. And certainly there are governments that have whole teams of hackers. And so data and intellectual property protection may be of utmost importance there. Ryan, did you have something you wanted to say, or did I miss something there?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
Thanks,
okay. I thought I heard somebody jump in there, so not a problem. So the Secuvant Cyber 7 helps to engender an executive workshop and an executive discussion surrounding these priorities. Once those priorities are understood, then you can dive into the security controls and begin to prioritize those according to the business need. All right, now we come to the assessment part then. What I'd like you to do for the remainder of this presentation is, as we go through each one of these areas, would you please rank yourself? So there will be 10 areas, so you can write 1 through 10. Rank yourself as a 0 to 5. So 0 being not effective, non-existent, 5 being highly effective, meaning not only do you do it well and are consistent, but you probably have metrics in effect to measure the effectiveness of that control. 3 would be somewhere in the middle. Yeah, we're okay, we don't have metrics, we're consistent, we could be better. So I'll let you be the judge on a scale of 0 to 5. All right, here we go. So the first one we've already been talking about, and that is aligning cyber risk to business risk at the executive level. So ask yourselves, how effective are you at doing this in your organization? Do you align cyber risk to business risk? Have you had that discussion with the C-suite? How would you rank yourself 0 to 5? Now, as you're thinking about that, let me describe, if I may, what this visual represents. On the top, you'll see kind of a faint bridge, and the concept there is to bridge the business mission and goals to ultimately the security procedures. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, a lot of organizations are vendor driven, so they jump right in here at this right portion of the bridge, the security controls, without understanding really where they're going and how the business mission and goals translate into the prioritized cybersecurity controls. And that's where the Secuavant Cyber 7 can help with that concept. All right, number 2, score yourself 0 to 5. Do you operate a cybersecurity steering committee? Now let me explain what that might mean for your organization. If you are a $100+ million organization, you probably have some, if not most, of these roles in your organization. And it is wise to form a committee that consists of these roles in the organization to discuss and to perpetuate continual alignment between cyber controls and security and the business needs. If you are a smaller organization and you're on this presentation today, then perhaps 5 or more of those roles are you or your CEO or COO, or perhaps there's just 2 partners, and between the 2 of them, they handle all of those roles. It's important, regardless, to determine which one of the partners is going to be involved in that cybersecurity steering committee. Somebody needs to represent the executive team and the potential legal and HR aspects, etc. And so how would you scale that committee accordingly? Maybe there's only 2 people on that cybersecurity committee. Maybe there's 4 in a small, medium organization. In a larger organization, there may be 10 individuals. But it's important to form it and to effectively manage that committee and talk about what is often a tug of war in an organization is operational effectiveness versus cybersecurity, and there can be a balance achieved. All right, concept number 3, and again, score yourself 0, not so good, 5, very good. How mature are you in terms of understanding the security gaps and risks within your business? And as you think about various elements of that, I'll just quickly go around the spider graph here. Asset management is something that is often, not done well in an organization. So for example, if you don't know where and what all of your servers are and that you've inventoried them and you maintain a list, we often find organizations that may have, for example, a server that's running Windows 95 that's still available on the network, and it gets hacked because Windows 95 is very vulnerable and hasn't been patched by Microsoft for quite some time. So what we find is that asset management is an often underutilized element of a good cybersecurity procedure, which leads to the next element, which is cybersecurity policy. We will be talking about that in a minute in more detail, but it's an important thing to have and understand the gaps in your organization. BCP would be your business continuity planning. Do you do it? Do you have it? In other words, if the servers go down, do you have backups? Where are they? What kind of succession do you have in your organization? And generally, from a technology perspective, if you get taken down by a hacker, if there's a ransomware attack, what do you do? Is there a risk management function? Do you have an IR policy? And we'll talk about that more. So these are all the different risks. SDLC has to do a software development lifecycle. And if you are a development organization and you write your own software, it's important to understand how you keep up with vulnerabilities and make sure that software is secure. So as you look at these elements, do you understand how well you're doing them? Do you understand those gaps 0 to 5? All right. Concept number 4. Have you created and published an incident response plan? If you're breached right now, in fact, I am hacking each one of you as we, no, just kidding. But if you were to be breached right now, what would you do? Let me tell you a quick story. We chatted with an organization not long ago that hemmed and hawed with regards to security assessment and monitoring services. They came back to us a couple of weeks later after making a decision to do nothing that they said, we have been hacked, and it was a ransomware attack. This organization had their documents encrypted. They were a defense manufacturer or contractor, and they were working on an RFP. That RFP would have been worth perhaps millions of dollars with the federal government. Because the ransomware hacker cryptojacked or locked, encrypted their critical data, they could not access the proposal and the deadlines. They ended up missing that deadline. Furthermore, this hacker got into their systems, and because they did nothing about it initially, he sent several nasty emails, one of which said, hey, I see that your C-level team has been out golfing. Tell them to stop golfing and pay attention to my demands. And just in case you're wondering, I have downloaded an additional 14 megabytes of your manufacturing plans, and I will turn these over to your partners to show that you have been in breach of their confidence with regards to cybersecurity on their information. This was bad, folks. They ended up paying, I think, 14,000 Bitcoin in order to get this taken care of, and that's not the best the best response either if you're cryptojacked. Which leads back to my initial question: is do you have an incident response plan? So what do you do? Do you have a lawyer that you can turn to so that everything in that data breach can be handled under attorney-client privilege? Very important concepts to understand. An important part of that is the press kit. How do you notify your clients? How do you notify your consumers? Who are the key personnel? Do you have an association with a cyber lawyer like Holland and Hart or Ray Quinney Nebeker, or there are many good organizations out there? Do you have a relationship with someone? All right, enough said about that. Let's move on to number 5. Have you documented and published formal information security policies? So an IR policy is just a component of a good information security policy, and that would be, for example, do you allow Internet of Things and mobile devices in your environment? If so, can they connect to directly to your network? Do you have a guest network for people that come to visit at your office and want internet access? And is it segmented from critical data and communication on your core network in your environment? You know, folks, I find that interesting that a lot of times a small business will say, hey, we really don't have a network. We use AWS or Azure or Rackspace, and all we have are our personal computers, so there's no servers, no network. Well, guess what, folks? How do you access those servers? You access them through a firewall that's on your environment, through computers on your environment. You authenticate into a cloud from your environment, even that's in your home, and therefore there needs to be cybersecurity protections and controls. Otherwise, that data can be vulnerable. Credentials can be stolen, credentials can be hacked, and even sometimes encryption can be broken. if it's not properly done. So are there information security policies that are governing these kinds of things? All right, number 6. How many of you deal with third-party vendors that either take your data or, for example, that you outsource certain functions to them? And do you carefully select those vendors, and do you require contracts and agreements that may, for example, if you're outsourcing things, do you verify that they have SOC 2, SOC 1 certifications as appropriate, or other ISO certifications? Do you vet and do diligence with regards to some of these vendors? Here is the famous example, and I think everyone's heard this story, but it's a good one, and that is that several years ago, as you all know, the major retailer Target was hacked. And the way they were hacked was through the HVAC system, the HVAC vendor. It was a backdoor way, but because that system was connected to the rest of the Target system and ultimately point of sale systems without presumably the proper segmentation and authentication controls, well, the hackers were able to get in and breach, steal credit card information. So do you have a system to manage third parties and cybersecurity risk of your vendors? So make sure you score yourself 0 to 5 on that point. All right, number 7. Is everybody still with me? Raise your hand if you're awake. Number 7, do you conduct formal audits of your security controls? Now, for larger organizations, I think this is easier. If you're a small organization, it's not so easy. But there are products out there where you can do self-assessment questionnaires. I work with a vendor, for example, WebCheck Security, that has access to an assessment tool and a training tool for employees. But often, for example, a large organization may be subject to ISO 27001, and that requires an internal and external audit every year or every other year, which leads to that second bullet point there with follow a framework. So if you are not following a framework, it's hard to conduct any kind of an audit. Against what standard or framework are you auditing? It's very common. So an organization may be beholden to HIPAA or PCI, but it's also common to do something like NIST is gaining ground and acceptance and prominence in businesses today because of the rigorous framework that it suggests. Do you follow that framework? Another good one is the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, so commonly known as the CIS Top 20 controls. Very easy to follow. They have everything to do from access management to vulnerability management. And so following a framework can be an important part of your formal security process and audit process within your organization. And then again, can you map those priorities back to business objectives? So how would you score yourself on number 7 at this point in time? Okay, moving on to the next concept. How much do you know about your cyber insurance coverage? What's in your liability policy? Is there a cyber portion? You may find that maybe data breach remediation costs, maybe it's limited to $50,000. That's probably not enough. As we saw earlier, the average in America is $3.8 million. So what is the reach and extent of your cyber insurance policy? So I would score yourself on your understanding of that within your organization, 0 to 5. There are a lot of good cyber brokerages out there. Some of them deal specifically with a cyber branch or cyber insurance. So it would be well to have a meeting with your existing provider, as well as perhaps talk to some competitors that can offer a different perspective. On this presentation here is another data breach calculator, which you'll find that information interesting as well. And again, after the presentation, this slide will be this slideshow will be available to you. All right, number 9, and this one's a tough one. Do you identify and classify critical and sensitive data within your organization? So that involves determining what data is sensitive and important. And some of it would be obvious. If you're a healthcare organization, any of your patient information is critical. Is it segmented? Is it encrypted? How do you protect that data from the outside world? And there are many ways to do that. But until you've categorized data, you know, the company party and the server that the newsletters and other content on, maybe not so important. And so is there a data classification process within the organization? And the classification should determine the extent to which data needs to be controlled or secured. And again, it gives examples up above: personal data, health data, financial data, proprietary data. Are you a manufacturer, or do you have procedures? Maybe you're Mrs. Fields Cookies and you've got proprietary processes and recipes, and you don't want those getting out to your competitors. So that might be high classification data or sensitive data into your organization. So 0 to 5, how are you doing in that area? Now that brings us up to, before I describe the next component, which has to do with the concept of phishing and employee awareness. Some time ago, there was a delightful segment on Jimmy Kimmel, where Jimmy came up and showed a video where they had social engineered just people on the streets. And although video unfortunately doesn't come across some of these webinar facilities like WebEx and GoToMeeting, I'll just talk you, I won't actually play this, I'll just talk you through it. As I said, Kimmel has his staff go out on the street and talk to people. And what they asked these people were questions like, what were their favorite, you know, did they have a dog or a cat? These are just personal questions of really little impact. And the thing was, hey, we're going to find out what your passwords are on your computer. So the video is hilarious. And what ends up happening is these people divulge information in the course of conversation, such as, again, names of favorite nieces and nephews and pets. And by the end of the conversation, the interviewer would say, well, I think we know your password. Is it this? And the person would say, oops, yes, it is. And as you can see the reaction on this girl's face, that was the reaction of most of the participants. Wow, you got me. At the point of the whole exercise, folks, is that the biggest liability really is people, that they divulge information, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes through ignorance. And so the question in your organization, and this is what I want to score you on next, is do you perform ongoing security training and phish test campaigns? Yes or no? Let me give you an example of that. And as you can see, a lot of these folks walked away just laughing their heads off because they realized they'd kind of been scammed. We had in one of our client bases with Secuvant, and this client obviously will remain unnamed, but another defense contractor inadvertently was clicked on a DocuSign link that he thought was a legitimate DocuSign. In fact, he had been closing on a property, and sometimes these hackers may be listening outside the firewall. You can't really control that. course, if your communication is secure and good, anyway, I won't go there. But somehow they knew how to get to him. So they sent a DocuSign that looked real. He clicked on it. Immediately, it began to introduce malware into the system. Now, fortunately, this was one of our monitoring clients. We perform security operations for smaller clients where we outsource a full security operations center. One of our analysts saw a bad signature coming in to a particular IP address on that network, and they were able to flag that, notify the IT director, and of course he was embarrassed because he was the one who clicked on it, the IT director. Well, everybody needs to be reminded, even IT directors, of the whole phishing thing. And so let's score ourselves here, 0 to 5. Do you perform some kind of ongoing security training at least once a year, or as new employees are onboarded? And do you do phish testing? Now, sometimes you can go out and buy software like KnowBe4. Secuvant does penetration testing, and also along with that, we can do phish campaigns where we'll take a select number of individuals within an organization. You provide us their emails, we'll let you know, and maybe nobody else, that we're doing this, and we'll send some very cleverly crafted emails with a landing page, and we'll keep track of the stats, who clicked on what and what credentials did they yield up. So that would constitute a good testing campaign as far as phishing is concerned. I laugh at some of these pictures, door code 63526, or people who leave Post-its on their computers, password. I laughed. I went to a hotel in the, I believe it was in the Baltimore area for a conference, and this was a nice upscale hotel downtown. And as I was going back into the pantry, which a lot of these hotels have, you can go in and buy juice or ice cream or a chocolate bar down by the lobby. I turned around and spied that behind the front desk there was their reservations computer, and on the reservations computer was a Post-it note that had the password of the computer. And believe it or not, the password to get into the system was actually password. It flabbergasted me. In fact, I have a picture of that, and I should have used it in this in this presentation, but I thought that was pretty funny. So do we train our employees not to do these kinds of things? And is it ongoing and consistent? So make sure you've scored yourselves there. All right. Now we've come to the end of the cyber litmus test, so to speak. So what I'd like you to do is, of course, add up your score and divide it by 10, and that will give you the average of what your score is. I'll give you a minute to do that. So add up the 10 items, what you scored yourself, divide them by 10. And don't despair if your score was a 1.5, if you were honest, or 2. That's common. We will go in and do more in-depth assessments with organizations, and often that is the score. And those are sometimes in organizations that are $500 million organizations or more. But that's okay. The idea is that let's find out where we are and let's make a plan to go forward. If you scored somewhere around a 3, that's great. Lots of room for improvement. If you scored higher than that, Ryan, either they're not telling the truth or they're doing some great things in their organization. But literally every organization has areas that they can improve, and we certainly would like to help you figure out what those points are. Well, that brings us to some thoughts at the end of our presentation today. What we'll do is let's, Ryan, if you want to conclude, and then we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A.
Absolutely. So just a couple of things, and thank you, Greg and Secuvant, for helping with us and helping and committing this time and educating and providing some guidance and direction.
Our pleasure.
Just a couple of things to provide as action items. Whether you're a small business or a large business or anywhere in between, obviously there are things that can be done to help protect the data that and the information that is very much a big part of the value of your business. One of those is, again, to reach out to your current legal counsel and your current insurance providers, making sure that you have, or at least you understand where you're at with respect to liability, and both from the insurance perspective as well as the legal perspective. So you can do that with your existing legal counsel and insurance providers that you have in place. And then obviously here with the litmus test that's been provided by Greg, there are things that can be done. And Greg, I wanted to ask you as well, even if let's say I'm a really small business, I do $500,000 a year in gross revenue, are there things that my business can do? I don't have all of the staff. We don't have an official or formal steering committee, although you did address the roles that are part of that, and 1 or 2 people could have all those roles. But in terms of myself as a small business, how concerned should I be to take even these relatively small next steps? And is it the hackers will go after the big companies because they're the ones in the spotlight, or should I also consider myself or our business a potential target, if you will? Greg, what are your thoughts?
Ryan, that is a great question. I'll answer that 2 ways. One is that every year, a company that we're all familiar with, Verizon, they're more known for the mobile side, but for those who don't know, they have a big data security practice as well. And Verizon will do a report at the beginning of each year reflecting on the past year. What were some of the cybersecurity challenges? What were the demographics of attackees? How are the attackers getting in? And to your point, Ryan, one of the key findings for the past several years has been that the 60% or more of all of the cyber attacks in not just the United States, but internationally have been small business. And you don't hear about those. The little $80,000 fine to the small Mexican restaurant. Most of the world would never have heard about that. I knew about it because I sold them their forensic engagement. I helped them to try and secure the premise. But one doesn't hear about all of those hacks, and so you can never say that it's not going to be me. And that leads to my second point, which is, a year ago, as a matter of fact, in June, about this time, I was happily driving home from work on a beautiful spring evening, and I got T-boned by a guy who wasn't paying attention and pulled out right in front of oncoming traffic. It totaled my car. Fortunately, I was okay, but my airbags went off, and you know what that means. Adjusters will usually total the car. And it made me realize that, life is short, and from a business perspective, there's no way you can say it's never going to happen to me. One of the Homeland Security directors several years ago said there are 2 kinds of business in America: those that have been hacked and those that are about to be. And so even small business needs to take precautions to do that. And I think there's probably a part B to your question, Ryan, which is, well, what can that be? Now, Secuvant does a lot of different things. For example, and this was one of the Q&As, is what other services does Secuvant provide? And this picture that you're seeing on the screen is what you call a security operations center. This is ours. It's a room that looks just like this. It's filled with analysts. It kind of looks like a picture from Jason Bourne, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Or some kind of a movie. We do this for clients. A small business, though, may not be able to afford our monitoring services to kind of get their back and kind of watch their back, so to speak, for a couple $1,000 a month. Now that's only $24,000 a year, which maybe that's okay for a small business. It would cost them 10x that in some cases to hire a security analyst and to subscribe to the software necessary to do these kinds of things. But barring that, there are other things that a business can do. A small investment in a small, like a $5,000 assessment, for example, would be apropos, or maybe a scanning or a penetration test, maybe some monthly services to help develop information security policy. And then Ryan, to your point, if I back up here, it's free to reach out to a lawyer and say, I'd like to establish a relationship. Let's talk. Let's meet. Let me get your number on my Rolodex, so to speak. That doesn't cost any money. And so that was an excellent suggestion on your part to reach out to insurers and the legal community. But Ryan, just doing simple things like having purchasing of scans for a few $100s and doing those kinds of things, it can be a good step in the right direction. And certainly we can help your clients to do that.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour. So again, I wanted to thank Greg and Secuvant for sharing their expertise. They are very, very good at what they do. And again, what they do can be customized based on the needs of the business, whether it be small or large. There are ways to take advantage of services that are offered, that they offer to make your environment more secure and less likely to be, certainly not, it will be a target most likely, but to succumb to that target or that targeting, Secuvant can help you avoid that. So again, thank you to Greg and Secuvant for being part of this. If you would like more information or would like to ask questions, my contact information is on the screen. And again, we'll make this session is being recorded and has been recorded. We'll make this available to you, both on our website, based on your access, and then also based on just a request coming to me via email. I can also share that with you. So thank you for your time this morning. Again, any follow-up questions, please reach out and we'll take it from there. Greg and Secuvant, again, thank you for your time and your efforts.
Most welcome, and thank you again, Ryan.
Bye.
Bye now.